Vidmori POV. To be surrounded by such humble opulence was an interesting experience, to be sure. I could tell that the feast was a somewhat rushed affair, yet the air of joy and exhilaration of the villagers and soldiers, who were just grateful to be alive and well, elevated the overall good feelings of the celebration to noticeable degrees. Lugosi was content to stand by my side, having managed to get enough rest throughout the day that he was now nice and alert as he took in the sights and smells of the party around us. Fraley was almost overwhelmed by the possibilities before her, between all the new and interesting-looking people, tantalizing foods, and even the music in the air. She didn't know what she wanted to do or where she wanted to go, so she opted to just take in everything from my shoulders until something really called to her. Basmori, for his part, was just reluctant about the whole thing, having originally been riding the good mood about his new clothes and looks. I could tell he was just wanting to take to my shadow and just hide out in the comfort of the darkness with all this activity around us. However, I could also feel him reasoning that he needs to be out and about more now that he's being publicly displayed as my son, and now that he was a beastkin, he couldn't just hide away whenever he wanted. That little train of thought earned him a gentle head pat, as I couldn't help but smile at how quickly he was becoming more and more aware of himself and the others around him. After the honor guard of soldiers initially dispersed, Trellio and Vivia stepped away to mingle and talk to notable heads of the community and various other villagers, showing how comfortable they were around their own people, and how their people were comfortable around them, despite the sheer difference in status. There was, of course, a thin veneer of professionalism in the way they carried themselves amongst each other, but the good cheer of celebration sought to whittle even that away. I found myself walking amongst the villagers as they parted, and despite being the celebrated hero of this feast, it was like most people hardly even noticed me. Not that I was actively seeking out their attention. I didn't mind, after all. Even back in my old life, I often preferred hanging out along the edge of celebrations, watching other things instead of being right in the thick of it. Usually, at least. I watched as a young man was hitting on a soldier around his age, and surprisingly not striking out despite being physically smaller in most respects, when I suddenly felt eyes focusing on me. Slowly turning to look at the approach of their owner, I spotted Ren as she walked up on her own, looking between myself, Fraley and Basmori, before flashing a small smile. "Well, hello there, Ren. Is there something you need?" I asked pleasantly, as I turned my body to face her, giving her my full attention, while my kids looked her over with interest. "Hello there, Mr. Vito. I was just wondering if Fraley and Basmori would like to come and play," she asked, offering a smile as she looked between my kids, before looking back up at me. "The other kids are organising a big game of hide-and-seek, and I thought they might want to play too," she enthused cheerfully, and I could clearly tell that today she's likely had the most fun she's ever had in such a long time, and sincerely wanted to share in that fun. At the mention of hide-and-seek, I could tell that both Basmori and Fraley were intrigued by the prospect, as their ears perked and towels slowly swished and swayed behind them. I could tell they've watched the kids of the Haven play, and even Fraley's gotten the chance to join in at times before. "Well, what do you guys think?" I asked, letting them make their own choice as I gently scratched at Fraley's throat, before looking down at Basmori while he continued to hold my hand in his. "I want to play," Fraley said enthusiastically, as she began slowly climbing down my front before hopping off my chest to land beside Ren. Looking at Basmori, I could sense his hesitance. He was worried that he would come off as weird, or just strange in general, now that he was pretending to be a person. He's had very little experience around kids of the age he's presenting himself to be, let alone around kids in general. Before I could try to reassure him, it was Ren who spoke up first, with a surprisingly reassuring smile on her face. "Don't worry about something like that. I'm not used to playing with kids either, but it's been going alright so far for me," she mentioned, as her ears slowly waggled. "You could tell what he was thinking?" I asked curiously, and while I wasn't particularly surprised that she got something through the empathic bond, I was surprised by how quickly she was learning about her abilities through our bond, since she'd only had them for about a day now. Ren looked somewhat bashful, but flashed a wide smile as she nodded. Not everything. I can kind of get vague feelings and impressions, but his anxiety is rather palpable, she explained rather dutifully. I could tell she was telling the truth. At the very least, she didn't seem to catch the worry that Basmori was pretending to be a person, and felt the anxiety he had about being around other kids. Interesting. That's likely due to the familial bond you two share through me, but still, I wasn't expecting you would be able to tap into that so quickly. You really do have a talent for this sort of thing, I said, as I reached out, gently patting Ren's head with my gloved hand before I could stop myself. It was only moments after that I realized that this might be inappropriate, as we're practically strangers despite our recent bond. Slowly I pulled away, flexing my hand, before offering her an apologetic smile. Sorry, I only just realized that might not have been appropriate. I hope you'll forgive me. Ren's cheeks were flushed as she looked down at my feet, though I could tell it was really only out of slight embarrassment. From what I could sense, it felt like she just wasn't used to the act from others beyond her brother patting her head. Her hand slowly reached up to her head as she touched where I had patted, before just shaking her head a little bit. It's fine. Don't worry about it, she said softly, before managing to look back up at me. Not entirely sure what to make of the head pat, but at the very least I could tell she didn't hate it. Looking at Basmori, I could feel that he was pleased to have someone else around who could understand him, despite being unable to speak. After some more hesitation, he glanced up at me for another few moments, before releasing my hand with a smile, as he walked over with Ren and offered her a small smile. Ren smiled cheerfully enough as she took Basmori's hand. Great! This will be so much fun, she enthused, as she ran off with him and Fraley, disappearing into the crowd soon enough, as I was now left to my own devices. Lugosi dutifully remained by my side, just content to observe and people-watch with me, as we came across Cecil and that Beaverkin mage, Aspen, talking about the battle that took place, and generally discussing their shared affinities in water magic. I did sense Cecil wondering where I was, but I didn't feel the need to make myself known at this point. Moving on from them, we spotted Lostral and Riley conversing rather amicably. Despite the differing personalities, it seemed like they were good friends outside of work, but nothing more as far as I could tell. While looking for Chris and his team, I spotted Zax hitting it off with a young dwarf of some kind. I couldn't tell if they were a man or woman, what with the facial hair and round build, but they both seemed to be quite content to be in each other's presence. It was only then that I started to notice that a lot of younger people were pairing off as the party went on, some slipping away from the festivities altogether, as I spotted Chris being led away by a rather eager-looking Sarah. As the night went on, I felt a set of eyes properly locking onto me, as their owner made their approach. Turning to look, I spotted a rather buzzed-looking Vivia making her way over. I could tell that despite how inebriated she was still rather aware of herself, and surprisingly coordinated as she flashed me a rather warm and flushed smile. I still find it quite a shame that you can't properly enjoy the festivities like the rest of us, though I'm glad to see that you've at least decided to stick around for the fun, even if you can't partake in particular. I just chuckled at her comments, before flashing a warm smile of my own. I was never one for parties anyway, but I have the most fun seeing others enjoying themselves. They've certainly earned the right to unwind and let loose after nearly losing their lives today, not to mention celebrating the lives of those who were lost in defense of this place. Vivian nodded a little too much in agreement before taking a swig of what appeared to be some kind of purple-tinted mead. They certainly have, she murmured agreeably before standing a little taller, doing her best to steady herself as she watched the plaza with me. It was a quiet few moments before she looked up at me again. So, what do you make of us? She asked, before looking out to the plaza again. You said you were going to wait and see how tonight plays out before you tell us about your business, "And I'm interested in hearing about what you make of us," she asked, with rather sincere curiosity, before taking a smaller sip of her mead, now just nursing her drink. I just smiled a bit, reaching down and gently rubbing my fingers through Lagos's thick coat, the wolf in question happily leaning into the touch as his tail slowly wagged. "Well, your people certainly love you. I can tell their appreciation for your leadership and lifestyle carries much further than the food and drink you've given them today," I mentioned, before looking over at her. "I'll be happy to talk with you in the morning about my business in the capital, once you sober up, of course," I mused with a grin, as I looked back out at the plaza. Vivia scoffs in a good-natured way before chuckling a bit. "I'll be fine. The Trellio might be a different story," she mused as she took another sip of her mead. "Half-elves aren't exactly known for their livers. Let's just say that I'm usually the one dealing with the local dwarves," she mentioned cheerfully, while nudging my arm with her elbow. I couldn't help but offer a chuckle at that, before slowly nodding my head. "I see. Well, I'll be looking forward to our meeting then," I said simply, before going back to the people watching. Though as the minutes ticked by from then on, I noticed that a lot of the kids were being sent home, as the night party continued on. Even Vivia noticed, as she glanced up at me while nursing her drink. "It looks like the little ones will be turning in soon. Will you be staying up with us?" she asked curiously, though it was then that she had a realization of her own as she watched me. "Now that I think about it, can you even sleep?" she considered, while taking another sip. At that, I just slowly shook my head, a small smile still on my face, as I glanced back at her before looking back out to the plaza. "I haven't needed to sleep for a very long time. Oh, how I miss it," I mentioned, before sighing for no other reason than to just sigh. "In regards to whether or not I'll be staying for the party, well, I gotta make sure my kids get to sleep. After that, I'm not sure. I usually try to find some work to keep myself busy. Maybe I'll train." Vivian nodded slowly, as she considered her words before looking over at me with a small smile. "Well, if you're looking to pass the time, you're free to use our library," she offered, before taking yet another sip. "There are all sorts of tomes, history, fiction, glossaries of all kinds. I'm sure you'll find something that suits your fancy." I think I'd like that. It's been a long while since I've read a good book," I said, before smiling more sincerely, while slowly nodding my head. "I appreciate it. Thanks." Vivia just shook her head at that as she brought the mug to her lips. "It's the least I could do, Vito. Have a good night," she enthused warmly as she started to walk away, the trio of kids soon making their approach only a couple of minutes after Vivia left my side. "Hey guys, everything alright?" I asked, offering them smiles as Fraley immediately began to climb up my leg so that she could lay across my shoulders. Ren just offered a cheerful smile as she looked up at me while still holding hands with Basmori. "Yeah, we had a lot of fun, but everyone else is going to bed now," she explained, while her tail swished behind her with clear delight. "With that said," she started to say while scratching her cheek with her free hand, "do you know where I'll be staying tonight?" "Yeah, you'll be staying there with the rest of us," I said simply while pointing up to the castle, an amused grin on my face as I watched the confused uncertainty growing on her face. "Wait, what? Really? I get to stay in a castle?" she asked, her ears perking in her excitement as her tail swayed even more. "Yeah, the elites of this village said that my people are welcome to stay in their home, and you are one of my people," I mused with a smile, just happy to feel the joy and excitement that was radiating off of her. "Let's get going," I say, while waving her along as I turned to start walking towards the stone bridge. "It's time to bring this day to a close."